We in this country have all been infected by our history of racial inequality. I think we're all compromised by this narrative of racial difference that was created during the time of slavery. And if we're going to free ourselves, if we're going to cure this infection, we're going to have to talk about these eras in our history that we have not yet addressed. America is unique in some respects. There was slavery all across the world. But in most countries, slavery was a transitional status. It could happen to anyone. It was not permanent. They were societies with slaves. America became something different. We became a slave society. We made slavery a permanent, hereditary status tied toward race. And we tried to legitimate it by making up this ideology of white supremacy. We came up with a narrative of racial difference where we argued that black people aren't as good as white people. And we used that narrative to sustain and legitimate slavery.
If we think about slavery, historically, especially in the South, people were not considered to be full humans, right? And so we see that with a lot of practices with inmates in terms of their loss of rights, and also when they are finished with their terms, they lose the right to apply for federal programs and receive money. They're often not eligible to live in things like Section 8 housing. They can't get student loans. They often can't get jobs because of the label that's been placed on them. So definitely there's some practices there that echo it. Definitely the war on drugs played a pivotal role in this. So one, it created fear in a lot of ways that then bred reaction. And so as a result, in the 1990s, when Bill Clinton was running for president, we started seeing the Get Tough on Crime movement. And so the policies as a result of this fear of super predators and violent criminals, because the violent crime rates were the highest in the 1990s. And so policies like mandatory minimum sentencing, 3 strikes laws basically led to these very long sentences that were given to offenders. And so that essentially bred mass incarceration.
So you can't understand these current issues of police violence or the death penalty or over-incarceration of people of color without understanding that there is a presumption of dangerousness that gets assigned to every black and brown person in this. Now, I work in communities where I talk with 13 and 12-year-old kids who honestly tell me that they don't expect to be free by the time they're 21. And it's not an irrational fear. The Bureau of Justice now reports that 1 in 3 black male babies born in this country is expected to go to jail or prison.
There are issues like overcrowding, lack of services inside facilities, for example, mental health or medical treatment, programs that are needed for certain types of offenders, sex offender treatment, those dealing with substance abuse issues, those dealing with physical or sexual abuse histories. Again, we don't have the resources that we need. And so as a result, these offenders are basically falling through the cracks. Sometimes they go in with mental health or medical issues, but often it gets worse while they're in prison through solitary confinement, through other punishment issues that we use. And so as a result, there become a lot of human rights issues or individual rights issues. Jim Crow laws impacted African Americans and other minority groups, but that really has impacted a lot of the policies that we see. One is the disparity in sentencing between powder and crack cocaine. For example, it takes basically twice as much drug of powder cocaine to warrant the same sentence as crack cocaine with much lesser amounts. Generally, it tends to be a racial issue. So primarily a lot of whites tend to use powder cocaine, and so we have a lot of African Americans or other minorities using crack cocaine, so there's a disparity there with the drug, even though chemically it is the same drug, it's just in a different form. We also see class issues in there as well. So again, lower class offenders tend to buy crack cocaine because it's cheaper, where it's a lot of inner city street deals with crack cocaine versus powder cocaine being more prevalent in suburbs or neighborhoods where the deals are taking place. So we tend to see sort of all of those things converging to make race an impact with a lot of these policies. Ultimately, I think the key is to make policy change. And so that often takes a long time, but it's the most effective way. One thing that we're starting to see is that politicians that were on opposite sides of the aisle during the 80s and the 90s are now coming together to realize that these very harsh punitive sentences that we put into place, these policies like 3 strikes or mandatory minimums, were not a good idea. I also think that advocacy in general for prisons and prisoners' rights has started to change, just like we've seen a lot of other movements around the country. The Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, we're starting to see a rights movement for people who are incarcerated, but also people who are formerly incarcerated, right? And so again, trying to get voting rights back, to make them feel like they're participating members of society, that they have a voice and they can make change.